I
meeting
know.
is being recorded.
That's the first time I've heard that.
Yep. Hmm.
Pretty cool.
I mean, I suppose. Okay. It looks like we're live. Now, okay, so we are live. I see that we're live on LinkedIn, Vlad. So Frank, every time we go through this for the first couple of moments, we check to make sure that we're live on everything. And I make some community announcements. And so I think first, and I haven't told Vlad that I was going to say this, we need to congratulate Vlad and the whole team at Solus PLC. And for anyone watching here, you guys cracked 20,000 subscribers, Vlad.
Thanks, Dave.
I've been harping on it for like 2 weeks of people need to subscribe. People need to subscribe. And I'm like, have we cracked 20,000 subscribers? And they've got like 20.3 thousand subscribers now. So here's to 20,000 subscribers. I think the next stop is 50,000 subscribers and then
That's
a
right.
million and then a million. I'm not sure we're going to
Well,
do the million
100 is a
before
big milestone on YouTube,
100, yeah.
especially, I guess.
Oh, and then we can put the silver, the play button behind you.
Yep. It's going to go right here.
Oh, yes. Okay, so anyone watching this who isn't subscribed to Solus PLC on all like 6 of their YouTube accounts needs to go subscribe to Solus PLC on YouTube so we can get a silver play button on Vlad's wall back there. I think it would actually.
Thanks, Dave.
You got
Appreciate it.
the machine vision on one side. You'll have the play button on the other side. But no, awesome. So as everyone knows, continuing with the comments, if you guys are in here, please, follow and like us on LinkedIn, YouTube, and all your normal podcast platforms. I'm told it makes a difference. I don't know why, but I'm told it makes a difference. And as this is episode 14, I kind of feel compelled to continue to harp on this message because this is what professional podcasters do. And Vlad and I have now made 14
Is that
episodes.
what we are?
No, but we're just people that have made 14 episodes and at some point would like 6 reviews on Apple Podcasts. I actually have no idea how many we're up to at the moment. If you guys want to check out previous episodes, we are also live on manufacturinghub.live. Vlad does a great job of making sure that, well, he did a great job of setting it up, and I think now the episodes just kind of auto-populate after he hits the go live button. So thank you on that side.
They actually
Vlad,
don't auto-populate, but yes.
Okay. So
I have to
see, I was
edit
trying.
each one.
Okay. Vlad goes through a painstaking process every week of specifically adding these things. So
Yes.
please go to the website and check it out. I don't think you can leave reviews there at the moment, but please go to the website and check it out. Again, we're on our rolling weekly schedule. After this week, we will be back next Wednesday as well, and we'll talk more about that towards the end. Yeah, I mean, I think we're super excited. As everyone knows, if you guys have questions as we're going through this, please feel free to drop them in the comments, and we will go ahead and answer them. Vlad, do you want to kick us off and introduce Frank this week?
I guess the last shout out, I believe that Preston actually made some form of announcement, and I believe that we'll have him to maybe formally introduce the giveaway. But there is a Change a Life giveaway going on by Preston Hadley, one of the people that came on the podcast. And so we're definitely looking forward to seeing him again and make an official one. But yeah, there's stay tuned. That's going to be broadcasted. I think it's either the next episode or the one after that. But
Next episode,
in a nutshell,
yeah, next episode. So he's going to be on the 2nd, next Wednesday.
Excellent. But yeah, that is something to definitely stay tuned for. But without any further delay, we are on episode number 14. Today, we've got Frank Lamb, someone that many of you may recognize from the community, very involved in the automation space. Frank, and you do a number of things besides, systems integration. You have your own company, you train people, you have written books. You also have your own podcast/show every Friday where people can join, ask questions. You've had some very interesting guests, some of which, I've also kind of viewed. But we'll get into that. I guess I want to get more details out of you, like what prompted you to start that, but just involved are all around. And I think that that's very admirable that you're trying to, probably have an angle on many of these things, and you've tried things, you've succeeded in many of them. So we'll talk about that for sure. But I think it's very, very cool, and for what it is, like I look up to you for, someone who's been through this journey in many different facets and want to learn from you. And I'm hoping that some of our listeners too will have questions. They want to learn either how to, build your career, expand your career, get into all sorts of different things when it comes to automation, manufacturing. And so without any further delay, if you want to give us like a short introduction or a long one, if you'd like, of what you're currently doing and what have you been involved in the past.
Okay, well, I'll give you a little bit of my background. I was a very poor student in school. And so after diddling around for a few years, I joined the Air Force, and it was probably the smartest thing I ever did. I learned electronics, and oddly enough, my first job in the Air Force after I graduated electronics school was teaching electronics. And so they put me through an instructor school, and they kind of taught me how to create a lesson plan, even though we already had canned lesson plans and things like that. But they kind of put me through what it takes to teach classes. I did that for a few years and then ended up doing engineering and installation around the world. And I met my wife in Japan, which was another really good move. After I got married, she said, well, you need to go to college. You've been doing this military stuff, but I don't want to be a military wife. So I left the Air Force and I moved here to Tennessee, and I went to the University of Tennessee as a 30-year-old freshman, which is a kind of a different kind of thing to be doing too. And this was about 31 years ago. Got my electrical engineering degree in the typical 4 years, and went to work for a couple distributors selling products. And at that time, PLCs were, my first PLC was the Eagle Signal Micro 190. It was all DOS based. So I used the DOS programming software and that kind of thing. Then I got into Omron and Allen Bradley, but they were handheld controllers or the big TV screen things on the carts, and you would program them that way, basically. I didn't do a lot with them for the distributor and the controls company that I worked for. I mostly sold components, right? But then when I hired in with the Allen Bradley distributor, they made me a product specialist. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how many people know how Allen Bradley's distributors work, but they force the distributors to hire engineers. So there is a PLC specialist and there is a motion control specialist. You will always have at least those two people in every distributorship, right? That's part of having that distributorship. And then they have reserved territories. Well, at that time, they were saying, we need a third specialist. And that covers everything except for PLCs and drives and things like that. And so part of my product area was vision systems. At that time, Allen Bradley had machine vision. They had something called the Pyramid Integrator. I don't know if you remember that, but it was a PLC 5 platform. And so you could tie your vision system into the PLC 5, and you could do very rudimentary SCADA and things like that. Well, I was kind of on commission and doing sales at the same time as being a product specialist, got tired of it, decided, you know what, I'm going to start building control panels and doing small programs for people in my area. And of course, since I was in a lot of the plants, people would say, you used to come by here and sell us Omron, and now you're an Allen Bradley rep, but we're all Omron. So we can't buy your Allen Bradley PLCs, but you know what? If you build us a box, we don't care what's inside of the box. So if you put an Allen Bradley PLC or whatever you want to, we just need something that, for instance, detects the little notch on a compressor hub. I had to do that one time, and it would turn it to the little notch and then stop there, and they would, mark it and things like that, and then pass it on. So I got into doing those little projects out of my garage. After I had done enough of those little projects, little tiny things, I said, I think I can do this on my own, and I'm just going to go into business for myself. So I collected 3 or 4 jobs up, and I said, okay, it's time to go, working out of my garage. I was very busy doing this stuff, and I thought, maybe I need help. I'm going to move into an office and hire somebody. Terrible idea. Do not start a company that way. All right. So I hired a guy. We were very busy for a couple months. And then all of a sudden, I was so busy doing these little jobs, I didn't have any more jobs. Right. So I have a guy, I have an office, and I have no work. So immediately I started kind of running up credit cards, right? I have to pay for the office. I have to pay for myself. Bad idea overall, right? I did find more jobs. I ended up teaming up with a custom machine builder in Knoxville, Tennessee. He built packaging machines. He had started his company very close to when I did. And we kind of grew together. So the first guy I hired became a second guy. Then I started hiring guys out of ITT Tech and doing controls projects for him, right? While I was doing that, he built all his machines out of extrusion. And he figured out, oh, Frank does vision systems and gauging machines, things like that. Maybe we should start doing that too. And he started selling to the local automotive customers. Then probably 6 years into doing that, he decided, I'm tired of doing all these custom jobs and I only want to build packaging machines. So he got out of the gauging and vision system job and I got into it. And since I'd learned how to do the extrusion stuff from him, I started building frames out of extrusion, putting cameras in them, PLCs, gauging equipment, LVDTs, whatever it was, and doing measuring for the local automotive plants. So that's kind of how I got into machine building. It got bigger and bigger. I hired a machinist. I was still in debt. I'd taken the credit cards and I think I ran them up to some amount, and that was my running capital thing. I had a $50,000 debt. No matter how large I grew the company, I had about 50 grand in debt, which was probably, like I said, not a good way to start it. But I did that for 10 years. I had that company, the original automation consulting services out of Knoxville, and we became a decent sized machine builder. But eventually it got very big, very capital intensive, and I found myself not doing what I like to do, which is programming and designing machines. Instead, I was supervising other people programming and designing machines, right? And selling, which I still don't like doing and I'm not particularly good at. So in 2006, I closed that company, moved here to Nashville, and I went to work for a big machine builder called Wright Industries. They're now JR Automation. So some people may be familiar with JR. They're one of the bigger machine builders in the country, do a lot of automotive and pharmaceutical and government jobs and whatever, and they buy up other companies. And then another big company bought them up. So Hitachi now owns JR Automation. Okay. I think they have 24 branches or something like that, all over the United States in different places. I did that until 2012. I went back out on my own, same company name, this little logo here, Automation Consulting, but instead of services, it was a LLC. And I made a deal with my wife. She said, do not hire people again because all you're going to be doing is chasing people. And I said, good deal. That's what I'll do. I contracted for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden, I had an opportunity to go teach a PLC class contract for a Canadian company. And they kind of cold turkey sent me the book, sent me out to North Carolina, said, teach the slick class. And I was like, okay, well, I'll go do that. Read the book, said, I can wing this. They send all these suitcases out, ship them to a hotel out there. I go out and meet the suitcases and the laptops at the hotel, teach the class, and it turned out to be pretty fun. So 2013, 2014, 2015, I kind of grew and started doing more and more of that and less of the contracting and design work. And by about 2015, that was probably 70% of my work, but I spent 37 weeks out of 52 weeks out of town traveling. It was fun. I got to go some cool places, went to Haiti and Trinidad and all over the US and Canada, and they'd send you wherever, right? Some good places, some not so good places, right? But a lot of times that's what it is. You go to a hotel or you go to a plant and you teach a canned PLC class. It's 4 days long if it's ControlLogix or Siemens. It's 3 days long if it's a Slick class or a Wonderware class. I think the HMI classes, Factory Talk View, are 3 days long, and they're the same class pretty much every time. What's not the same is the students, right? Sometimes you'll get maintenance guys, and what do maintenance guys want to learn? They want to learn troubleshooting. So troubleshooting, normally you would think it's a multimeter, it's looking at the lights on the PLC, it's not programming the PLC. As a matter of fact, you get into some places like pharmaceutical and you can't program the PLC. You can't change validated software. So every class was different. But I found that like if you teach oil and gas guys, you have to learn their language, right? They're talking giant pumps and pipelines and all process control stuff. We have had this discussion about P&IDs. They live and die by their P&IDs, right? Then you go to an automotive plant and they've never heard of P&IDs. They PID control? No, different animal. So they have no clue what it is. So you have to learn the language of the people that you're teaching to. But I found anyway, from that way back when I was in the Air Force, I'd segued back into training, full circle. It's 30 years later, maybe more than that, right? When I start teaching these classes, and I found, I really like teaching. I get a lot out of it. I enjoy talking to students. And then 2016, I said, I think I can make my own class instead of contracting to automation training. So I built a training facility. And some of the pictures that you see up on the walls here or on my website are like, I had a big fake factory in this training facility, and it had a dial table and cameras on it and little escapements that would drop balls into things. And you could just do a lot of different things with it. And the original company I contracted to was one of my guests on my webinar. It's called Automation NTH. Don't know if you guys are familiar with them. Pretty good sized company. They're coming up on 100 engineers at this point. Local here, and they do a lot of work for pharmaceutical, automotive, and right industries, right? So they send their engineers to the local machine builders, ATC, which is Automation Tool. They're another real big machine builder in the area. Nissan, Bridgestone, those are some of their customers. But something interesting, they started an internal program called NTH University. So NTH University takes interns from school and teaches them the way that NTH does things. And they need content. So the books that I'd written, in 2013 was my first book, Industrial Automation Hands-On. They use that as the core of their basic automation training after students get out of college. So all the little basic things, the pneumatics and things that you don't learn in college, right? It kind of added some of that stuff. So I started creating content for them, wrote another book in 2019 on PLCs, started teaching my own classes out of my facility. And then a year ago, I think we've talked about this before, a big tornado came through Tennessee, and my office was dead center. It was ground zero, which is only 1.5 miles from my house. Took the office out, destroyed most of the equipment. I was able to rescue some laptops, things like that. But of course, then COVID hit 2 weeks later. So all of a sudden, all this training stuff that I was doing traveling around the country certainly ended. The training out of my own facility ended because of COVID. So I found myself very quickly having to pivot. What I decided to do is, hey, I'm good at writing books. I'm going to create more content. So I started creating videos only about a year ago and doing something that Vlad's done, which is PLC videos. But I found pretty quickly there, it takes a long time to create videos, and I don't have years to do it. So I started kind of winging it. I created one formal video with actual tests and quizzes and things. And then I started just, you know what, I'm going to start a program and I'm going to just start adding routines to it and simulating things and getting crazy with wild programming and, simulate vision systems, use random number generators to do things. It's pretty fun. NTH has kind of gotten wind of that. And so this week, for instance, I'm teaching a class for NTH specifically on simulation. It's those interns, they come in here. I've got 4 of them this week, and we use the control logics and we make things happen. And so today we wrote an add-on instruction for a servo indexer. And it turned out to be pretty tough. I don't think we're quite there yet, but it accelerates, moves a distance, decelerates, and you have to coordinate all the timers and things that make it seem like it's doing that, and all the pulse counts, right? The position. You have to watch the position go up, ramp up, and then go to speed and then ramp down and all that. So we're building these add-ons that we can kind of use as a library, send them back to Automation NTH, and then the next simulation class, we'll use that add-on, maybe create another one. And create the back end of it. So that's kind of where I'm at right now, is creating content for things like that. And I have this Automation Academy thing, nothing like what Vlad has with the big Solus PLC, but a lot of my students have joined that. And what I do is I put all my material on there. I put all the uploads and paper uploads and video, all those videos I was telling you about, put those there in a little community and a little how to find a job kind of section. And so I'm kind of pushing all that because I have to be online. I don't know how long it's going to take to get back to traveling across the country and teaching PLCs, but I think it's segueing to this. I haven't quite gotten to where I can teach people remotely, right? Automation training does that. They'll have people log into their computers. They use WebEx, and you remotely drive their computers. But I think that takes maybe more bandwidth and more software than I currently have. So I don't have a way for people to remote desktop in, connect to a real PLC or a simulator, and then walk up to the laptop and help them, which is kind of the way they do that remote training. So I'm not there yet, which only now has videos and in-person classes, which, you know, I don't do the 8 people at a time much anymore. Sometimes it's 1 or 2 people at a time. So I'm kind of having to segue to this video stuff. And that's kind of where I'm at now. And I do still do integration. I kept one big customer down in Miami, and I go down there 5 or 6 times a year, and Big Playground. It's another guest I've had on my podcast. So that's kind of my life history and kind of where I'm at.
Frank, before we throw a question at you, I want to mention on Friday, you're getting the students to come on your podcast, and there's going to be a live show, I guess, that people can also join. Can you give us some more information as to
Sure.
what time, how do they join? And I'll post a link to your profile. I guess that would be the easiest way to find all of that.
Sure. So it's every 2 weeks, not every week. It's called Mastering the Machine. And that site that I created, I kind of joined this other thing called the Membership Academy. And they said, you know, if you have a website, you need to do live events. And so I said, okay, every other week I'll do a live event. I've had Dave and Vlad as guests on, interviewed them, talked to them about their history, kind of like we're doing here. Had a variety of people, and this is the first time that, you know, I teach these classes pretty often, but this one happened to land on an NTH class that I'm teaching. So it's on the last day of the class. The students started yesterday, 4-day class. We're doing simulations of, I don't know if you'll be able to see this picture, this system. So
Yeah,
I drew this up for them, and I said, okay, this is what we're going to simulate. It's an indexing thing with a bunch of fillers and a robot. And we're simulating all that. It's at 10 o'clock this Friday. It is called the Mastering the Machine webinar. Been doing them every 2 weeks since the end of November. 10 o'clock
Central, just to
10 o'clock Central Time, 11 o'clock Eastern Time. I do post all kinds of links on LinkedIn. I have a little email that goes out to people that subscribe to my stuff. I have automationllc.com. If you see anything there where you can enter your name in and do a download, that kind of puts you on my email list if you're interested. And those people, about the only emails I send out are links to that webinar. That's pretty much the only real live, consistent thing I do. And what I found is, like, when I'm in Miami, I just do a live show from Miami and I interview the owner of the plant. Or I think on the next one, I'll be there in mid-June. And I would like to just find a way to take my phone, and we were talking about recording things, and just walk up with the phone and talk about all the different machinery and things around the plant. That would be pretty cool, because they have every kind of machine you can think of: process control and, you know, servo stuff and palletizers and fillers and box erectors and, you know, bottle fillers, bottle blowers. It'd be kind of neat to do that. I'm sure I could fill an hour with it. But yeah, every other Friday, this Friday, and I'll just put the links on LinkedIn. And I don't think you guys have the link yet. I did post it the other day, but you're not on my email list. So I do email that out the Monday before the webinars. Yeah.
Right. Frank, I want to, I have a question. So I picked up during, I guess, your introduction, a very, how to say it, like, intriguing point, right? Which is tied into automation sales. So you started off in sales, right, for a distributor, obviously, like, as a technical expert as well. And in my mind, I guess those skill sets are somewhat complementary, but often very difficult to master for engineers, especially, or for myself, right? So I guess I'm curious your thoughts on, you know, the importance of understanding sales from like an engineering standpoint, and how would someone in a technical position would go about learning those skills, right? Because as you mentioned, if you want to even transition into running your own business, whether it is like consulting or distributing these parts, it becomes very difficult because it's a balance between executing the work but also getting the new projects in before you run out. I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
So my first job out of college, and the only reason I took it was because I didn't want to leave Knoxville. And I took a job, oddly enough, with a future engineering manager for one of the machine builders that I was working at. But I took over his job, and he worked for a very, very small controls. Somebody coined the term disreputor, and it was because they were a distributor of some products, but they were a manufacturer's rep for other products. One of the methods that the owner of this company used to get sales he would take like these micro 190 controllers, and he'd say, this is a PLC. It will replace the relays and things that you're currently using. It has timers in it and things like that. If you need help putting this together and making your stuff work, we'll do that for you. We'll help you sell it. So I very quickly learned, I guess my method was help the customer solve a problem and you will sell the products. So he gave me a list of existing accounts, and he also said, feel free to break any new accounts that you want to. So what I would do is if I'm in an area, at that time, you could cold call. So you could just walk into the lobby of the plant and say, I want to talk to the manufacturing engineer or the engineering manager or whatever. Sometimes you'd get the cold shoulder, which is tough. You know, people are saying no. And sometimes you'd get, they'd say, sure, let me see if he's in, especially small companies, right? The small companies, the guy'd walk out after a while and he'd say, oh, sure, what do you got there? You know, if they had extra time or whatever it is. Some of the existing customers, we would have like, I remember one of them was Marca, which is Matsushita Refrigeration. You'd get I'd get the name of the maintenance supervisor. And first call, I'd go in there and say, can I speak to Jerry? And, talk to Jerry a little bit, and he'd start telling me a little bit of what they do. And some people would take you on a tour of the plant. So all of a sudden you see opportunities to sell things. Hey, you could, did you know we sell these photo eyes? We have a really cool photo eye with a little bar graph on the side that tells you how much light's coming back, So I spent probably my first maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks simply reading all the catalogs. I think the catalogs are the best way to learn about products and how they work and all that kind of stuff, even if you're already an engineer, right? Just get a hold, and these were only paper catalogs. There wasn't a World Wide Web. So I just read all the specs for everything, and I got a hold of the physical products, and I'd look at them and how they connect to things and maybe wire them up to something or whatever, and then go out and bring physical products and go show them to people. That was easy with a small company like that. That was fun. I didn't make any money doing it. So then I went to work for the Allen Bradley distributor. That was a whole different thing. You had an assigned list of accounts, and Allen Bradley, you have reserved areas. So if somebody's going to buy Allen Bradley, they're going to buy them from you. It's their only choice. They're going to buy it. At that time, it was something called Roden Electric. And I started out kind of as a salesperson, but they quickly said, well, we don't really have enough accounts to make you a full salesperson. So we're going to create this product specialist position since you like reading catalogs. And they sent me up to Milwaukee, and I, took all their classes, including the PLC classes. And I saw how they made the products, and I watched them blow things up, right? You'd take drives and they would stress test the drives until they exploded in a room. That was kind of neat.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, neat stuff. What happens when you put 1200 volts on this 480 volt drive? Well, boom, that kind of thing. So that was kind of neat, and I did that, like I said, for only a couple of years, and I was in the same geographical area that the previous company I was in. So I'm calling on a lot of the same customers, and that's where that story of, gosh, you were selling Omron a year ago, and now you're selling Allen Bradley, and we don't use Allen Bradley. And I was like, well, but you're the customer that I knew back then. So that's why I'm coming to see you, and say hi. And that's where I started picking up some of those little side jobs. I think, if you come straight out of college and you can learn the products, it's a really quick segue from learning what the products do to actually using them, to putting them together and putting them in a plant, right? Using the VFDs, using the PLCs. At that time, they were all slicks, and the micrologics had just come out, so it's kind of early on in the PLC. PLC 5 had been out for a while.
Which still takes quite a bit of time, I guess, to learn, I would say. And so, like, I'd be curious to, I guess, maybe understand a little bit better, as someone who trains people on a regular basis. Like, what do you see that specific industry transforming into? And what I mean by that is, you've got your traditional classes that I still think are very important, right? Like in person, and I think that's the real way to learn. But people are trying to more and more, I feel like, shorten that time period. And so you see a lot of schools going online. We have an online presence, so do you. And so I'm wondering, like, what kind of a blend, because I really think that there's going to still be an opportunity for both things to exist. But also, like, what do you think is a normal timeline, right? So to give you an example, I think a Rockwell engineer right out of college is trained for, I think, 6 months before he's sent out to the field. But in your experience, I guess, like, how long does it take to teach maybe a double E PLC and HMI and controls, as a whole? So I guess, like, a few questions into one. Sorry.
So a contrast here. A typical maintenance guy, the classes from automation training are 4 days. The first day you do some hardware stuff, kind of talk about what that is. The second day you're doing probably bit logic, which can go slow or fast depending on how much people know about electricity. But usually, people are just learning how to fix things more than anything else. Then you maybe get into timers, counters, but it's CAN. I tell people right at the beginning of those classes, you will be comfortable with the software in 4 days, right at the end of the class, but you will not be a programmer. Sometimes you get guys that are engineers and they truly do want to learn to program. The maintenance guys, they have to create timers and counters so that they can modify them and even troubleshoot their own program. They know what it's like to type things in and change things, but they're usually not, they're not going to program things. They don't know how to originate their own logic. The engineers, by the third day, maybe you may have a mixture. You may have maintenance guys and engineers. The engineers, you kind of have to throw some of your own stuff out there. The problems aren't necessarily in the book. They're not writing original code. So I have to give them a little extra side thing to keep them occupied. Even then, they will not be programmers in 4 days. Now, some of them, such as the people that I have here in this class today, they've already been through college where they took PLCs, which back when I went to college, PLCs weren't part of the curriculum. And you might have one, but it was an old PLC 3 or something, and you'd spend the whole semester just getting it up and doing anything, right? And then maybe wire a couple things in, do some simple stuff. Nowadays, they have very elaborate hands-on equipment in a lot of these schools, in the universities, the tech schools, all that. So the people that I'm teaching for like an NTH class, they've been through 1 to 2 semesters of PLCs. They are not programmers. They learn timers, counters, whatever, but they did it an hour at a time, 1 day a week or 2 days a week or whatever it is, and they work a little bit hands-on. They get done with that school and they go to an internship at NTH where they use the videos that I provided to NTH. They watch a live class that I did for Dexcom out in California. It was 5 days and it's probably 8 hours of recorded video of just me helping the Dexcom guys troubleshoot little conveyor equipment, little demos that we had. So truly hands-on stuff at that point. And so by the time these interns get here, they have had, I would guess, maybe a couple hundred hours of hands-on experience with PLCs. So they're ready for, we're going to write a program. As a matter of fact, their internship project, they have 2. They start out with RS Logix 500 and they do this simple conveyor with a pusher, and just reject parts. If the part's laying down, it's detected and you have to kick it off. And then if it's standing up, you let it pass. It's got a little bin that you remove. If there's the bin is full, then it won't let any more pass. If you put parts too close to each other back to back, you don't want to let one go through. So they test them, make sure they can get through that before they ever get to my class here. Then they build their own control panel. So they have to learn how to do controls. And what I see on the wall behind you is a bunch of different PLCs. What they've built is at least 50 different platforms. Everything from Modicon to Mitsubishi to building controllers, right? You would have a building control system, doesn't even program and ladder, but they do the same conveyor application with whatever their platform is. Then they do the same thing with an HMI with Factory Talk View, a little panel view 700, and a control logics. So by the time they've gotten to this class, they've done those three things. And so they're ready to really originate programs. And that's when we start talking about, like the contents of my book, here's an input routine, here's an auto sequence, here's how they work, here's an outputs routine, here's faults. You know, they've already kind of done that, but it was very simple on this conveyor. And then it's different every time we do it here. So like this project, this is from a student that I have in my automation academy. We just adopted this. But it takes, you know, to really be a programmer, like these guys, that's going to be their job. They're going to get out, they'll have a year of experience and they'll send them out with somebody possibly and doing, you know, some kind of an integration job. Within 2 to 3 years, they'll be sent out on their own. And they'll go work at the machine builder, and they'll still probably be under somebody's supervision. But by the time they've got 5 to 10 years of drawing things, debugging panels, building machines, I would say at that time, I would call you a programmer because you've done 10 years of hands-on with 150 machines. But until then, you know, I see people put together projects, right, in plants with little conveyors and pushers and things like that. And some of the logic is just convoluted. You know, they just keep scabbing stuff on until it works, which is okay until somebody has to fix it or until it gets so complicated because they added other modules. Oddly enough, if you go look in programs across the country in automotive plants, process plants, whatever, you will see a lot of similarities in the programs. There is no real book on the way to do it, but there is a way to do it that almost everybody follows, right? It's just natural to take all your faults and put them in one routine, right? There's nobody that says to do that, but that's what everybody does.
I mean, you learn pretty quickly, right? On that point, if you walk onto a job and you see that the faults are scattered all over the place, and then, you know, sent to your main routine wherever, and it becomes like very challenging for you, and you learn pretty quickly that you should be doing it that way. It's a trial by fire, I would say personally, but yes, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah. So when you see this stuff scattered, you know, this was maybe done by a maintenance guy that went out on his own, became an electrician, right, and is working for the local machine shop to put something together that works. And that's very common on some of these smaller, like Poke-Yoke machines or whatever. If these sensors are all made, then release the part because it's been built correctly, right?
Right.
You'll see a lot of those kind of things. Oddly enough, you'll also see that in some OEM equipment. And I think the reason for that is, like, take a packaging machine company, for instance. You are not going to rewrite the program for packaging machines. You're going to probably build 1 or 2 models, and then you're going to build the same thing over and over again. So the guy that put that together was probably not a super experienced programmer unless it's a big packaging machine company. And even then, the guy who goes and works for that company, he's going to run out of challenges after they built the first machine because he's not writing any new programs, right? So that's why in a lot of those programs, you don't necessarily find the organization that you'll find in an automotive plant where they, you know, or Procter and Gamble or some of those people, where it's just so many different kinds of machines built by big professional machine builders. So there's, and that's where you get into the way this looks normal. Now, sometimes those maintenance guys, they work in a plant and they saw 100 programs and they program like they saw. And that'll be a pretty good program, right? And they went to work for a packaging machine builder or whatever, and they wrote a pretty good organized program. But that's somewhat rare.
Right.
Palletizer manufacturers, well, it's hard to write a palletizer program, right? That's a lot of moving boxes and organization. You have to have good visualization. Those are usually written pretty well. Big, you know, bottling plant machines, bottle blowers and things like that. Big, complicated machine. You can't have an inexperienced guy writing that. But some of the smaller things that are a car wash, you know, doesn't take much to program a car wash. As a matter of fact, I think that's a college project, standard college project now, right? So Sometimes you'll see weird programs in there where they did scatter, they put 28 faults in 14 routines, scattered around. So if you had to debug that, it's kind of tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's the reality of the industry, though, because a lot of, again, in my experience, programmers or engineers and automation in general, like, don't get the opportunity, I feel, to design things from scratch, right? Like, until they reach maybe that like 7-10 year mark, like you said. In general, if you go into like a plant environment, you're going to make like small tweaks here and there, but you're typically not going to, like, execute entire projects, of course, unless you bring in some like very custom equipment and that third party is either unable to do it or for whatever reason, like, you have to write code. But typically you won't be doing like from scratch. You will be either given, here's the current system, can we add this, this, and this, can we create like a new HMI screen? And so you're adding to a system versus maybe doing from scratch, which I think like really takes those years of experience and being able to have seen, like enough palletizers in action to be able to program one the way it should be, right? Because like at the end of the day, it needs to work like clockwork with usually like 95+% reliability. So it cannot just be written by, the intern that you've hired over the summer. It becomes like a very complex and a challenging process, even though there's other machines out there, right? But
Right.
no, for sure. We've got a question from No Man. Have you ever trained PMs? I'm not sure if that's product managers or I'm assuming project managers or IT folks. And maybe he's referencing that in the sense that I'm assuming transitioning into automation from those two fields. Is that something that you've worked with, and what was your experience maybe?
Sure. So we get project managers from Dexcom and West Pharmaceuticals. What I find is they're usually pretty smart people that can easily transition, but they're missing some of the technique. Depends on what kind of engineering school they went to. If they're like a business person that went into project management, they may not know the full. They have a general idea of electricity, but they're missing some of the little details, like they don't know what a PNP or NPN transistor is. Therefore, when you start talking syncing and sourcing sensors, they don't really get the electrical part of it. But if you're going to be a project guy, right, you have to be able to do the physical part. You have to debug things and understand why the sensor that you hooked up is not working, right? It's not changing state or anything like that. So I kind of have to do the extra training there. Maybe it's a little handout, or maybe it's in a little electrical diagram with some keys, and they don't need to necessarily know solid state theory, but they do need to know what the names of those things are and kind of what they're doing. And they need to know what voltage and current are, and they need to know the basics of Ohm's law. They need to know some math. Sometimes I get guys that know business math, but they don't know really engineering math. But yet in a PLC, most of your stuff is math. It's moving numbers around and it's doing mathematical operations on them, scaling things, doing P and ID, or not P and ID, PID loops. That's an art in itself that even people with a lot of experience sometimes go get a special guy to go do. So sometimes they don't have the background, but it's absolutely possible because a project manager is smart. An IT guy, right, is usually very smart. Sometimes you have to change the IT guy's method of doing things. Like I see a lot of things on the internet now about structured text. Great. IT guys know structured text. Why? Because they learned C# and they learned Python and things like that in school.
Yep.
But in industry, even if you don't like ladder logic, even if you think that it's simple, right? It's what is in the plant. And it is what control logics in particular, which is probably, Allen Bradley is probably 70% of the US market. So if you don't like ladder logic, too bad, you have to learn it, right? And you can use your structured text, but you are not going to go into Ford and persuade them to write all their code in structured text. It's just not going to happen. So you got to deal with what is. There are 5 PLC programming languages, and you need to know them all to some degree, but you need to know the one that you're going to use most of the time the best, right? Which still in this country is ladder. That's what you're going to need to know. So IT guys probably have a good feel for the structured text, but disabusing them of the fact that everything should be written in C# or Python, or that you should use Arduino controllers to do PLC work. Good luck. don't argue with Ford or Procter and Gamble or any of the big companies. You won't win. Right? You'll just be working somewhere else. So
It's good that you've mentioned this, and as you started making that point, we had a question come in. So the question is, do you guys program in ladder, block, or structured text, or do you use all of them, and why? The person also said, I only program in ladder and use structured text for indirect addressing and for loops. So I'm curious, I guess, like Frank, I guess I can answer that myself too, but what are your thoughts on the different languages? Like, could you give us some examples too of where you would find like one versus the other? I guess not the ladder logic.
Sure. So ladder logic, you can absolutely do loops in. That's not a problem, but there's a technique to doing it, right? It's an advanced technique. So I don't recommend it to anybody who hasn't done a whole lot of ladder logic programming. Structured text is not so much for indirect addressing. Alan Bradley has a very excellent way of doing indirect addressing by just using arrays and putting tags in the arrays and doing indirect that way. Siemens has the same thing in TIA Portal. The older Siemens, you must do it in, and it's not structured text, it's statement list. One of the languages in PLC programming is something called instruction list. That's one of the 5 languages. Every PLC has instruction list, even Alan Bradley. If you ever double click on your rung, you will get a text version of the rung. That's their version of instruction list, and they call it ASCII mnemonics, right? It's just a text description of the rung. Alan Bradley, you can't really program in it, and you wouldn't want to, right? Siemens, if you are German, you learn statement list first. You do not learn ladder, maybe at all. You learn statement list and you type everything in statement list and it'll do things ladder can't do. So indirect addressing using pointers in step 7, you must use statement list. There is no ladder form of indirect addressing, so you're stuck with it. Structured text itself, if I'm dealing with a database, I would use structured text to do SQL operations. But my question there would be, why would I do that in a PLC? Why wouldn't, right? You don't have a database in a PLC. Right? You don't have SQL in a PLC, so I wouldn't probably do that. I would probably put all of that in structured text in Ignition, right? And I would actually write not structured text, but I would use SQL, right? Or I would use Python or Jython as it is, right? In Ignition, and I would write that and deal with the database stuff over here. If I'm using data tables and indirect addressing, again, Siemens statement list, STL. Is definitely the way to go. In Alan Bradley, I've had to use structured text. If you want to do loops, it's probably easier. I do not want to use just basic logic, bit banging. It takes 5 lines of code, something to do something that's 2 contacts long in ladder. So why would I choose ladder? Well, Alan Bradley is geared around ladder. It just is. I can do anything in ladder that anybody can probably do in structured text or function block or whatever. But I've seen plants, for instance, I do a lot of work for Bendix, and Bendix uses not SCL, SFC, sequential function charts, which is kind of that 5th unusable or less usable thing. It has steps and transitions, and what they have, for instance, all their faults, it scans through all the steps, and if there's not a fault, it goes to the next step. If there's not a fault, it goes to the next step. And then when it gets in between the faults, it branches off, and it says, okay, when you went through this transition, you had a fault here, so I'm going to branch off here, and I'm going to hold. Sequential function charts are very good for sequences, right? If you're going to do a sequence of operations.
For recipes, I found them, I've seen them a lot in like recipe management, right? Because you have like steps, like very defined, like we add this, then we mix, then we add another thing, then we mix, then we like transfer, then we heat.
Sure. Sequential anything. Now, because I've been doing this for about 30 years now at this point with ladder. It started out on the slicks, and ControlLogix is just awesome to do those kinds of things. UDTs, transfer giant structures around as recipes. I do all my sequences, either bit or step sequences. Why? Because the customer tells me to. Ford says you will use this kind of sequence. You will use our template. It will be ladder, and you will use this. So I don't have the option to jump out and use structured text, even if I wanted to. Cases where I've had to use structured text. There was one case where I needed to do 150 iterations of something in one scan. I can't easily do that in ladder. And part of the reason is, imagine putting a counter inside of a loop and turning on a bit. Well, you have to make that bit go off and then on again. You can't use a one shot because you're within the same little loop. So that didn't work very well. So I did. I created a little structured text routine that's what it did. It looped 150 times. I want to say it did it in about 3 milliseconds. So it didn't add much to the scan time. If I would have, I had a 50 millisecond scan time. And if I would have had to do 150 times 50 milliseconds, I would have been at 2 or 3 seconds to accomplish a bunch of data manipulation that I just didn't have another way to do. So I've jumped out and done that when I have to, but I would never want to try to program a whole machine that way. And again, I would box it up. You can't mix ladder and structured text in the same routine anyway. So I've built a routine to accomplish that job. I might wrap it inside of an add-on instruction, right? Just can it, which same thing in Siemens. Function blocks, people don't realize that, but the Siemens function block is an AOI in every way, except it's actually better. I told the students in here this week, I said, you guys are programming this AOI, you have to do it offline. You have to, if you're doing it online, you got to go import it or something. And then if it doesn't work, you got to delete everything about it, re-import it, and make it work. The function block, everything can be done online. I can do it while the machine's running, change my function blocks, re-download it and change it. And they've been doing that since the 90s. So it's not a new thing, even though, Allen Bradley add-on's a new thing, but function blocks are forever. They've been around for a long time. But I do see more people, I think people like structured text because that's what they learned in college. So they knew Python and they knew C#. That's what they learned. They were good at it. And they said, that's what I want to do in PLCs, not because it's better or it's different or whatever. If you've been doing ladder for a long time and you've learned complicated ladder techniques, ladder will do everything those other languages will do, with a few exceptions. Like I said, if I got to do 150 of something, but I could have passed that to Ignition and let Ignition do it 150 times. I didn't have to do that, right? So it's a matter of choice to a degree, but yeah.
No, I agree with you. I think it's underestimated to some extent what ladder can do when you've been brought up on those languages. And even, I guess, like myself, I still think in like C++ more than, what I do in ladder. Like, so when I type in certain logic, I always in my head translate back to what I had learned in that language so that it makes sense to me, right? Like even the for loops, I picture them more in C++ than I picture them in ladder logic, even though like I've done, hundreds, if not thousands of them, but it's still kind of, I guess, the mindset. So it's like whatever you've been taught is what you're going to retain. But I agree with you. I think like each one of those languages has its place, and I think it's better to know them rather than not. And they make things much easier, like you said, like in sequences, right? Like you can organize it, and then someone who's looking at that visually, it's better, and it's obviously a lot more intricate, but it's going to be a lot more powerful than the usual like move the number. So it's like move one, then like it's done, like move two, like that becomes very complicated. Or I guess like very complicated as you get more steps, and you just get like lost in that specific like ladder sequence versus sequential function charts. If it becomes complex, it's very easy to see how things are flowing. And same for function blocks. Like for me personally, like anything analog makes a lot more sense. Even like PID loops, right? Like that makes sense a lot more in function blocks. Obviously you can have the basic instruction and ladder logic too and make it work, but it just visually seems to be a lot more like condensed, and you see where things are coming in the instruction at least.
Yeah, and people are boxing things up now, right? That's what the AOI and the function block are anyway. They can be in any language. You can put SCL inside of a function of some kind, and the add-on is the Allen Bradley version of the function block. I see, for instance, people that like LabVIEW. There are a lot of people that's what they used in college, or they used it in a lab and things like that. They tend to gravitate toward function block, right? Because they know what those AND and OR blocks are and timers and things like that. And it's a linear this way program instead of a linear this way program. And they may like that. And that's okay. Safety systems, right? A lot of the safety PLCs lend themselves to that because you have dual inputs. So you have a block that has both channels of the E-stop in it, and it takes care of all that timing and switching thing for safety PLCs. again, function block, it lends itself to that. It's harder to program it in ladder. But there are good methods of doing it in ladder. And I can, for instance, sequences, I choose sequences in ladder always. And part of it is I have a method of writing it that is very clear to people that are reading it. And I separate things. And that's the way people don't realize this, but you go to the JR Automations and the ATCs or the ATSs, which are biggest custom machine builders in the country. They're doing $100 million systems. They're writing everything in ladder, and they're using sequences with the numbers that you talked about. Some of them can be confusing, especially if they start calling it a state machine. They'll start making up states, and there's a famous book out by a college professor that wrote a big state machine book. The problem is he made it up, and you know, there's already a way to do this in industry, and most of the guys that you go into the plant, they know how to read that stuff. And if you organize it well and you comment things well, then it's,
for sure. Yep.
You know, yeah, 10, 20, 30, 40, which it goes back to basic programming, right? We had line numbers, and you go from 100 to 200 to 300. And if you needed a line in between, you'd put 250, and then you put 260, right? And those basic lines, that's just what the sequences are. It was the same kind of concept. Yep.
Dave, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely.
You've been quiet this whole time.
You guys have just been going, like, I think that Vlad, you had like a 12-minute introduction, and then Frank caught us up on his entire life story. And as like the last 6 hours of my life that I've spent talking to Frank over the course of like 2.5 phone calls, it feels like this this is just a conversation that can absolutely go on forever. But no, so I had a question talking about training, kind of following up on Noman's question about training PMs or IT folks, and you had talked about how you would train some of them in classes. I mean, it feels like we are certainly getting close to a talent crunch on the OT side, that there are not enough engineers in order to do the work that it seems like is going to be demanded, which is a positive compared to about a year ago when it seemed like there was an awful lot of those folks out of work. But it feels like we're going to need more people to upskill or to learn how to become part of this industry. And obviously, Frank, you can't train them 4 interns at a time. I think it would take an awful lot of weeks training them 4 at a time, or even 8 or 10 at a time to get there. Where do you see the future of this industry? Do you think we're going to find more like IT folks who are going to become more of a part of the OT side? What's kind of your thoughts and projections on that?
So part of the new thing is all these junior colleges, and even one of the students in here in high school had PLC mechatronics classes. That didn't exist, right? We had auto mechanics, right, when I was growing up, or shop, right? You didn't have anything like that. I'm seeing a lot more of that for the younger people. So there are plenty of younger people. What they don't have is they don't have the experience on real machinery. Mm-hmm. Companies like Automation NTH are hiring, 4 to 8 interns per semester. And the reason is that all the other guys with all the experience are contracting. They're out either working for the big machine builders, writing complicated programs, or they're contracting to them, and they're too expensive for an engineering company to hire. So they said, we're going to train our own, right? We're going to give them 6 months of training the way we do things. We're going to put them in the panel shop. We're going to do all that kind of stuff. There are a lot of human beings out there, and I think a lot of this can be learned. It is no different than McDonald's to a degree. You can learn how to build panels with by formula. When you get done learning how to build panels and wiring them, then you can do some machine startups, and you can watch other people taking an existing program that's already been written and debugging everything and figuring out where all the sensors come into it, right? And what's working and doing that. You do that for a year, and then you move into, hey, I need you to go change that timer. And then it's, okay, hey, that conveyor thing, I want you to copy that conveyor routine into another conveyor routine and call it conveyor 2. And we're going to add it onto this. It's not that hard. And it can be very formulaic if you have templates and methods of doing things. And now what's happening is people are starting to can some of those objects. It's very object oriented, becoming that way. And you can simply take that object and feed different things into it and make it do what you want to. But there is a gap. There's a space in between those new guys coming up that have the hands-on mechatronics stuff and the old hands, which I would say are 50 and older now, that have been around for a long time. Now, I don't see a lot of guys that are in the late 30s and early 40s, probably with that kind of machine building experience. So I'm not sure age-wise what's going to happen, but I think the young guys are either going to have to learn through these on-the-job training things. Back to what we were talking about, there are a lot of OEMs in this area, manufacturers that have their own machine building companies in-house, right? Or their own integrators in-house, or their own IT, OT combinational guys that work in ignition or something like that. Those guys, right? Denso Manufacturing out here, Nissan, we have a big Nissan plant here. They have an awesome training program. You come in, and what you're going to learn now is their kind of equipment, but can you transition from the Nissan equipment down to the Volkswagen plant in Chattanooga? Sure, they're both automotive. They do things a little different, maybe a different PLC platform. But if you know Omron and Allen Bradley out of the Nissan plant, you can go work on the Siemens down there. You may have to take a class to learn from somebody that has done both, right? You kind of, what is the difference between an Allen Bradley and a CoreLogic and a TIA Portal? Oh, well, that's similar. They both have this. They both have this. Oh, this is different, right? So you're going to need those kind of classes. Can that be done by video? Sure, it can be recorded. There's no reason not to do that. Some of these places are simply putting people also through training videos and making them take little quizzes, and you check these boxes, much like Inductive University, the ignition thing, right? If you can pass all those things and you're answering those questions and you've been through their hand grading of some of the tests and things, some of these companies like NTH do the same thing. They hand check all of the students' programs and their functionality test. They say, does this work? Let's put these things close together and knock them over. And what happens when you hit the E-stop in the middle of when you're running this? By the time you're done with it, hey, a year or two of experience, you're kind of ready to go out in the field and do this. So what I'm seeing is more people training their own people, bringing them up from the bottom and not hiring the existing people that already do that because they're getting too expensive. I think the contractors are expecting to make, $100 and some an hour, and then they want to transition into working for an engineering firm, and engineering firms only charging in $100 and some an hour, right? So they can't mark up the contractor's fee. They'll just hire their own guys.
Right.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I appreciate that, Frank. I have one slight transition as we are running short of time, which is what we do every week. And Frank, I think I told you that maybe 6 months ago when Vlad and I were talking, we said we'll do this once a month for maybe 30 minutes. And now we're running every Wednesday, and somewhere around the hour mark, I'm like, oh, Vlad, we have somehow managed to make it to the hour. But no, so one thing that Vlad had pointed out that he wanted to talk about was work-life balance. And we had an interesting series of messages that we traded, I think towards the beginning of the year when I was down in South Florida and you were talking about the work that you do down in South Florida. And I remember seeing some pictures of some rocks in the back of a pickup truck while you were in maybe Northern Nevada a few weeks ago. Can you talk about like work-life balance and your philosophy on that? And I think you said that you generally don't fly, but you do a lot of driving.
No, I fly too quite a bit, but
Okay.
So when I started my own company, I found myself within the first year working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. I spent the weekends catching up for things I couldn't get done during the week. It took my wife to point that out and say, you work all the time. And I regret doing that now. And I got to a point where I went to work for Wright Industries more or less 5 days a week. You might be starting up a machine and on site, you might be 6, but you always had a day off. By the time I left Wright Industries, I was used to that day off. And now I force myself to take at least 1 day off every week. Also, working for yourself, of course, you can schedule your own trips and vacations and things. I drive to Miami and I drive as far as Philadelphia, Oklahoma City to teach a class because I have my own car and I can haul the equipment, the trainers and the laptops and things like that. Flying is generally quicker, but it's also become a real pain with the TSA stuff. And I have to carry 2 laptops. So, you go through all the check-in and everything. By the time you drive to the airport, get to your location, rent a car and drive somewhere, you might as well have driven anyway. You've taken a 4-hour flight, but you could have driven, or 4 hours of flying and diddling around, you could have driven it in 12 hours. So I'll go up to 1,000 miles driving. I've driven to Vermont this year and did a class, but when I went to Nevada, obviously I flew. Right? Did a lot of classes for Tesla. They're in the Reno area.
Sparks, yeah.
Yeah, Southwest is a quick flight to Reno. And all my California and Northwest classes I do, fly there, of course. But I'll drive if it's up to 1,000 miles. I listen to podcasts. I get out and walk on the way, and But work-life balance is critical. I think you need to have hobbies or go see your family or whatever. My kids are all grown up, so I don't have to worry about all that part. But that's very important. Yeah.
No, I love that. So Frank, for anyone listening or watching who is, thinking of starting their own company, who may or may not, or who almost certainly will get into that, you're grinding 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it's 8 months before you realize what you're doing. Do you have any like thoughts or recommendations for them as to how to kind of reframe life and maybe what you wish you would have thought about when you were working 7 days a week?
Well, for instance, some people go to church every Sunday. They're not going to work Sundays, so they're already taking a full day off that way. If you do that, I would say taking a Saturday off or most Saturdays off and being with your family is probably an important thing. It's nice to be home every night, but you also have to understand that if you're in the automation business, you will travel. If you're doing anything very serious and you're working on machines, you're going to go where the machine is, right? You can't do that at home. You can't phone it in. You can't remote. You can remote into equipment for sure, but there's some things, you got to adjust flow controls. You got to tune servos, whatever you got to do. It's hard to do that kind of stuff remotely. So and that time, the customer's always going to be telling you, you need to be working 7 days and you get it done, until this is done and this is started up. If you can pull it off, just say, I'm sorry, I only work 6. Take a day off every week. You need it.
Yeah, I think it's very important, right? And I think like people burn out fairly quickly, and it's just the nature, I feel, of the industry, right? Like once you get competent enough, then you book more jobs than you can, put your time at. And one thing is you're starting to do so many things that all your weekends are booked, all of your you just get too many things to accomplish, I guess, in that very short time frame. We got a question from Dave. So I guess that ties into one of your most recent webinars, Frank. So TATSoft. He's asking if you had a chance to look at frameworks from TATSoft. And I guess my follow-up with that is, I know you've got a customer in Miami. Obviously, I don't know how much you can share what choices you're planning to make, but I know you're considering maybe like Ignition versus TATSoft. Like, what are your thoughts maybe from what you gathered thus far?
So they already have a big Ignition installation in Miami. And his problem is for him to transition to the smaller stuff. They have a new platform that is, I think it's called Perspective. It allows you to put things on phones and tablets.
Yeah, the web.
For him to upgrade to that, he's going to have to pay more than his original installation of Ignition was. He's going to have to pay more than the server license that he has, which I think he bought for 17 grand, talked down, 5 years ago, and now it's 23. TATSoft is going to be half of that, and it's going to do all those tablets. But what he's going to have to do, and this is going to be his decision, he's going to be duplicating the functionality of Ignition. So we've been talking about, some of Walker Reynolds stuff in the unified namespace. Can you take the TATSoft and the Ignition and deal with the same SQL database? Of course you can, but what if you're doing them both at the same time? And how do you coordinate all that, right? So he's going to have that decision to make, but what he may do is use the existing database, take TATSoft off to the side, do all the mobile devices with TATSoft, and leave the Ignition as it is. That's more than likely what's going to happen. From what I've seen of the TATSoft software, and I've just had demos from Marcos Taccolini and things like that, it looks like it does everything Ignition does, right? In a slightly different way. There's a learning curve there too. So how long does it take to learn that? And they don't have an inductive university yet. So you're going to have to somewhat wing it, look at all the manuals and figure out what you're doing. But there's nothing like having a project in front of you to make you learn something, right? You will figure out how to do it, right? Here's the goal. Here's the SQL database, have at it. Let's bring all this and make our our tablet screens and our phone screens and make it all work. So that's probably what we're going to do. I just think the cost savings of making the mobile devices tats off. These are all the tablets that are on the fork trucks and the people that are doing all the pallet, dealing with
Okay.
pallets,
Yeah.
moving things around, and then the phones. Right? It's nice to be able to go into your phone and look at the status of a machine. And I think that may be accessing the data that's already in the database. We don't need to create anything new. We just go grab it. So interestingly, that unified namespace thing, we kind of just did that automatically. We had no reason to spread things around, and we just wanted to deal with all the material in the same location. So we didn't create multiple things. We didn't bring in other vendors. We just made up how to do it as we went along. So that's kind of how that thing evolved. But yeah, we'll probably be using that.
That's
So-
an interesting
Get it 3
use
months.
case. Sorry to interject. That's an interesting use case. I guess I see that more and more manufacturers are picking up, on mobile technologies, but I feel like there's quite a bit of training involved in, training up your, even like I said, forklift drivers and maybe operators to look on, like their phone or like a mobile device to see the status of the machine and maybe respond to some of those notifications. But I personally see a lot more of that, as we move forward, because it is a native device that pretty much everybody has. And if the company issues an iPhone or an Android device, then even better, right? Then you'd be able to like notify your people much faster, and you have access to it. You don't have to go to a physical HMI to see what's going on with your machine. So
Yeah,
for
if you're
sure,
on a fork truck
but
on
it's
a dock, you don't have a computer out there. There's
right.
nowhere to even plug it in. So you have to be mobile.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. That's interesting.
Yeah, and you'll have to keep us up to date with the direction you guys go, Frank. I have never seen a facility that has both ignition and a TaskSoft application up and running. Dave would probably know if you guys would be kind of one of the original folks to have both of those systems kind of running in parallel. I'd be interested to know how they compare head to head and how it works. Yeah, so you'll certainly have to keep us up to date with that. And Dave is in the comments talking about they've got workshops for clients learning the platform as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I look forward to using it. And again, I think the cost savings is the first thing, probably that attracts us to it. And then the fact that it has the mobile stuff already built in, it's .NET based instead of being Java based. So that's a little more native, native Microsoft kind of world, which is, like it or not, Alan Bradley's on Microsoft, right? That's pretty much what it's going to be, is Windows forever, I'm sure. So that's what we're dealing with. Yeah.
Which is a little frustrating, but it is what it is, I guess. But I think, like Dave, to your point, like just like any other migration project, right? Like you have this state where both systems are in place, right? Like Frank mentioned, maybe they'll take some features of TATSoft that they really need and implement them. And once they get up to speed, then they can start thinking like, well, in the next like 3 months, maybe we'll convert this other area to TATSoft. So I'm assuming at some point it will be maybe a blend, but then it will merge into one platform just for ease of maintenance. But of course, that depends on the costs to convert and like what that's really going to entail. But yeah, it's
and Juan Pablo already knows Ignition really, really well, and that's
right.
part of what's going to probably keep him on that platform. I don't particularly care, so I mostly create pretty screens for him. That's kind of, I'm much more on the front end. He deals with a lot of the database things. I write simple code. I deal with the PLCs. I deal with any changes that have to be made on the plant floor. I do all that. And then he mostly deals with the database, but he's got everything from human resources stuff to all his supplies tracking, incoming and outgoing pallets, shipping, everything is in this database. So truly unified namespace for every aspect of the plant. Yeah.
When you say unified namespace, to me, that's still, you have one SQL database, but I guess maybe it has a lot more meaning to some folks in the industry. But to me, it's just you're gathering all of your data into like one single repository in a sense, right? If you want to
Yes,
find
but
that.
there's also the other side, and we haven't worked this out yet because I'm not Walker Reynolds, so I don't know what he means by it. But I would like to
Right.
be able to, for instance, if I change something in the SQL database, that it goes back and changes the tag name in the controller or adds a tag or whatever. That kind of thing can be done. Not
Interesting.
necessarily in real time, but there are ways to keep track of that kind of thing And like I said, I have records of, I have all the PLC stuff. I can't go in there and necessarily automatically change it, but you can import and export tags. You could have all that stuff, created ahead of time, ready to change the tag name if you need to, or add the tag names in the PLC as needed. Typically, you're browsing for existing tags anyway, right? But if you build a new structure and for whatever reason, I think Marcos Taccolini said, in Ignition, I believe you can't do a UDT of UDTs. That it's a difficult thing to do, and you can't drill into things like optimized data blocks, but they're working on it. So they know that it exists and they're planning on implementing that. When that happens, all of a sudden, the sky's the limit. We can use anything from anywhere. We don't have to break it apart and make it in the format we need it to be. Yeah.
Right. Gentlemen, I think maybe time for last few questions, Dave, before we wrap up.
I mean, I think that we did a great job, Frank. Thank you so much for coming on. I feel like any question that I ask is going to drill us down another 35 minutes of rabbit hole, which is about exactly where I was when I asked the last question, saying I know we're getting close on time. So let's attempt to be respectful, at least mildly, for everyone who is watching live, for everyone who is listening. I will let Vlad wrap it up with the promise that we will have you back on, and as the Mastering the Machine webinars come out, we will certainly go ahead and promote those. You do a fantastic job. Vlad and I both enjoyed being on when we were on, and you guys do a fantastic job drilling into questions. And anyone who hasn't watched it should go back and watch Vlad's episode, in which Frank digs to the very beginning of Vlad's blog, talking about some of his hobbies, and just see the look in his eyes when Frank asks him about this specific hobby. But I don't want to ruin it for anyone that hasn't watched it, Frank.
I was surprised the level of detail that you went through to research.
I was scared.
The background. It's
I was scared what Frank was going to come up with.
Vlad, I'm stalking.
I mean, there's a lot of interesting episodes too. Like we talked about. I wanted to mention this, but didn't want to cut you off at the same time. You had a very interesting student that came in and learned pretty much like all that there is to automation, and I was very surprised in that episode as well, because it was someone who was working for I think it was like air purifiers or air filters company, right? And he decided to go off and design everything from scratch, including like a full panel. He did it all in CAD. He programmed the PLCs. He selected the devices with your guidance, of course. But to the point that we were talking about earlier, like how difficult or how challenging it is maybe to learn or transition fields. I think that conversation is extremely relevant, right? Like if you see someone who has done exactly that, and like there's a full conversation of like challenges and roadblocks and things he had to learn along the way. So I think there's a few episodes that I've particularly was like extremely impressed with, but we're going to post all the links. I've already posted them a couple of times on LinkedIn and YouTube. If you want to either connect with Frank, reach out to him with additional questions. I've also posted links to his website where you can learn more about what he does. There's also, we didn't discuss the books at all because we ran out of time, but Frank has multiple books. I believe, I guess the easiest place to find them would be Amazon, but you can certainly get access to them through his automation consulting and automation academy website. And so like Dave said, I think we'll be back with Frank because we have a lot more questions to cover and more things to discuss. But without any further delays, we'll thank you again, Frank. Thank you for coming on the show, and thank you everybody who's been posting questions. Like I said, there's been more questions that have been posted, so feel free to reach out to Frank directly. But we will be logging off and answering them at another time. Thank you everyone again for watching.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.